what does the application process look like? Maybe any frequently asked questions, graduate school funding, and any available resources that our campus has to offer students. So the first question is, what is grad school? So grad school, kind of the long version is basically, it is an advanced program of study. It allows for you to essentially give focus on a particular discipline or profession. It's meant for you to be able to focus on, research or an area that you really feel like you want to develop further skills in. Many programs are also available that are professional programs like law school, medical school. So it just really depends on what your interests are. So that's kind of a breakdown. On my next slide, I kind of have this visual that I think for many of us first gen folks, I think it's very relevant. I've actually had this close to this exact discussion with my mother when I was finishing my master's program, kind of that bridge of what not understanding how a program works, but also kind of trying to get them enthusiastic about what you're doing, right? And the next slide, what I really want to cover is, why do you want to go to graduate school? What is so important about graduate school? Essentially, with graduate school, you do have a greater income potential. You are less likely to be unemployed. There are increased leadership roles. For some professions, it is required for you to have a graduate degree. With that comes a greater ability to help your family and your community, and ultimately more access to healthcare and retirement plans. And I feel like a lot of these are kind of intertwined, but these are some of the benefits of going to grad school. They're not the only benefits, but of course they are existent in the experience of grad school, right? So what happens if you go to grad school? What does that look like? Essentially, the job potential, again, as I stated, increases. So these are some jobs across all disciplines and majors and programs where you might want to pursue a graduate degree. If you want to be a physical therapist, project manager, a web developer, a therapist, social worker, even community college instructors, at minimum, must obtain a master's degree. So just to kind of give you that insight as well. One thing that I want to discuss quickly before moving on is also the difference in degrees and salaries. This is just depending on also, the median household costs. For example, how much does it cost to own a home in a certain area? So that might also depend how much you're getting compensated for your work, but this is just kind of an idea. Say, for example, in social work, there is a base salary with a bachelor's degree, median salary of $42,000 versus with a graduate degree, $56,000. And again, this is based off of information from Georgetown University. This does change from year to year, depending on inflation, depending on the median cost of living where you're living. So this is just an estimate for those who are maybe interested in other areas. It might change. Kinesiology, as you can see, $54,000 a year versus $70,000 a year with the master's degree. So that's kind of, again, just an idea of what might occur if you decide to pursue a degree. So here I want to talk about the structure of undergraduate versus graduate programs. In undergrad, you're kind of learning the information that's already been out there, the information that's already published, and kind of absorbing that information. And you have a set prescribed set of courses that you're having to take, versus in graduate school, you are creating new knowledge through research. Maybe, for example, you are having a culminating project where you're kind of contributing something back to your discipline, or you're writing a thesis, right? And you can basically, depending on what your research is, kind of hone in on areas that you're really passionate on. Maybe, for example, you want to get your master's in kinesiology, and you want to contribute research in the area of, for example, how physical activity affects, the quality of health of children, right? So it might be something, a contribution you're making back. I know in social work, it might look a little bit different, Duan, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of how the structure in social work looks like.
Yeah, sure. So, and I can say it more on a global terms, like, and I can, use myself as an example. Like, I went to a university that was like the classroom size, like 400 students in undergrad. And so I didn't really feel like I fit in. And so, and I didn't have the best experience either. So there's always that component too. And so, grad school is very, very different. Grad school, at least here in the field of social work, our classroom size caps out at 30 plus or minus 5, and we purposely put it very small. And it really resonated to me because, like I say, when I was offered to go to grad school, or where I was working at, there they kept on suggesting that I go to grad school, and I told them I didn't want to go to grad school. I like what I was doing. I was doing direct service. I was doing public child welfare with DCFS, and but they're like, "Hey, you got to go," and I'm like, "I don't want to. I had such a bad experience." But I'll be honest with you, when I went to grad school, because the classroom size was so much smaller, it was a whole different experience than that of undergrad. At least for me, it was. And I can tell you here at Cal State Fullerton, it's very, very similar to my experience when I went to grad school at Loyola University, which is a very small classroom. It's much more supported. The professors actually got to know you as, and by your name. And so that support system really helps drive the experience. And so the biggest thing is, as Christian mentioned, um, I can tell you, I've been an administrator, prior to teaching. It, 30 years ago, getting a high school degree was you're good, and then if you had a bachelor's degree, you're golden. Nowadays, it's such more competitive. Like you're competing with those who have master's degrees, and so for the same job. Um, and so there is that that drive and that encouragement. And I will tell you, although I'm not a first generation, I am very mindful that somewhere along the line that system has to kind of to move forward. We have to break that chain and to be have that awareness and have that resource so that so when you come into a system like this, being a first generation, you don't know anything, and that's why it's so important to have this support system that Christian is creating so that you guys have an understanding. Because when I applied, even though I had a brother that went to grad school, I didn't know anything because I never knew. And so it felt like I was a first generation. So I know I kind of spoke out too much there, Christian, but I just want to kind of share with everybody how I think personally it's really important to do grad school. It doesn't matter which area you go into, but I do think it's a value there.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of is a good segue into kind of talking about, for example, you're talking about the structure, right? The classroom size. Um, as an undergrad, you're expected to fall no less than a 2.0, and as a grad student, you are pushed further up into a 3.0 or above. If you get below a 3.0, you are put on academic notice or academic probation, depending on which institution you decide to go to, right? Um, Courses also tend to meet at different on different structures. You might be meeting once a week for 3 hours at a time, and maybe you're taking 3 classes per semester. A typical unit load for a traditional program is anywhere from 6 to 9 units. I know for social work, it can range from 12 to 15, depending on if a student is on the 2-year or on the 3-year track.
Correct.
I don't know if, Duan, you want to talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So it, again, point of reference, I can speak myself as an example. When I was an undergrad, I had 2 jobs. I probably was making as much money I was when I first graduated from my master's program. Besides the point, it really was allowed, undergrad, I could do a lot of stuff. I still was able to have extracurricular time to play around and do sports and all that stuff while maintaining 2 jobs. But grad school is very different. Grad school, as Christian said, the expectation is much higher, the intensity is much greater. Yes, we do have a lot of students who are working, but it is very challenging. I'm not gonna lie. And the one thing that I try to tell students is like, it takes a lot of energy to apply to grad school. Yeah, for some of you guys applying to undergrad, may be equally intensive, but for grad school, it, because it is a next level of commitment. And so when you do get in, it is pretty, like Christian said, like for a full-time program, basically Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, you are in class from basically from 10 o'clock to 6:45 p.m. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, your alternating days, you're at your internship. And so it's really hard to find to have employment, especially full-time employment, because again, your weekdays are pretty much taken up by academics. And so it is something to kind of be mindful of. I personally tell students, if you're gonna do this, you got to do it. And depending on what major or where you go in, obviously as social workers, I try to tell students, you got to look at your return on investment, right? Because I'm also on the admissions committee too, and so we go to all these grad fairs, and for instance, USC for a 2-year master's program in social work runs over $110,000 for 2 years. Here at Cal State, we're running around $18,000. And so for me, it's really important to understand how much you're going to get out of it. As Christian said, the salary is noticeably different with that master's degree. And like I said before, nowadays, most programs, at least in the field of social work and in counseling, that's all they're looking for. They're not looking for bachelors. And there are incentives too, and we can talk about that later here, but grad school is very different. But again, the cool thing with grad school is the classrooms are smaller so that you have a better opportunity to be more vulnerable, but then to be able to ask questions and not feel intimidated. And that support system is so important, because for me, that's the biggest thing. One of the big most fundamental difference between undergrad and grad is that support system that you get embedded into with your professors and the grad program.
And so I think that's a perfect segue into even talking about culminating experiences. I know every program is different. There's some programs where maybe you'll have an option between a thesis and a project and a comprehensive exam. You have all three. Some programs, they will only let you do one. Maybe, for example, you're only allowed to do a comprehensive exam, or maybe you're only allowed to do a project. Ultimately, maybe that can be a determining factor of where you decide to attend. Some institutions, for example, maybe it's the same discipline, the same type of program, but maybe, for example, you're thinking about Cal State Fullerton versus USC or Cal State LA, and maybe the program at Cal State LA requires thesis or comprehensive exams, and maybe a program at Cal State Fullerton allows for you to do a project. So that might be a determiner depending on where you want to go. And it's also nice to have that flexibility, because maybe, for example, you start off with the intention of enrolling in the program and choosing maybe a thesis, and you decide along the way that you'd rather do comprehensive exams. And that actually happens quite a lot in some disciplines. But if you don't have those options, you might not have the opportunity to do that, and you're kind of stuck between choosing, between comprehensive, because you only get comprehensive, or maybe writing a thesis and maybe you're not as invested in the thesis as you thought. And that happens when I was in grad school. I know it happened to quite a bit of my colleagues, where they started off wanting to write a thesis and they ended up graduating having completed comprehensive exams, and that's completely okay too. For me, I'm a better research writer than I am a test taker. So for me, I wrote a thesis, but maybe in your program, you might not have that flexibility or that option because of what's expected of you in the program, right? And that being said, I think this is a kind of good segue is, how do you find schools? How do you find programs? What kind of information is out there? How do you get that information, right? I always like to say there are tons of different kinds of programs, and you have to kind of ask yourself, well, what at the end of the day is my career goal? I know, for example, here at Cal State Fullerton, some programs might have concentrations within them. Some programs, for example, might have certifications that are also granted, or hours toward a certification as well. And that might, for example, affect if you do decide to attend that program. For example, the counseling program here prepares you for certification with an LMFT licensure. And then, for example, the social work program prepares you for LCSW, Licensed Clinical Social Work. right? And so those are two different types of certifications. And it's kind of a lot of people often that I meet with say, I'm debating between social work and counseling, which is going to be the better of the two for me. And it's important to ask yourself, well, what are your interests? What do you want to do when you graduate? And that's how you kind of should explore options. So a lot of the times people also want to do the counseling program here at Cal State Fullerton, but our program does not grant a PPS credential, which if you want to go into school counseling, you do need a PPS credential in order to be a practicing counselor, right, at a school. So that's really important too in asking yourself, is this program right for me? Maybe it might deter you from attending the program here, and you might select another CSU that does have a PPS credential, or even a private institution that does allow for a PPS credential along the way. So one thing I want to kind of go over is what types of institutions are out there, right? The top two, those are, you're kind of already beyond those two. You've already, are close to completing your bachelor's degree. So the bottom two are kind of where you should be looking into. Public research universities like the UC system, there are 8 of them. And then there are 23 public universities in the CSU system, all the way up north as far as Cal Poly Humboldt, and as far down south as San Diego State. Then there are also private universities. You have private research universities like Stanford, USC. You have religious private institutions like Santa Clara University, University of San Diego. And there are liberal arts colleges like Chapman and Occidental, as well as small specialized universities, for example, Western University of Health Sciences, Southwestern Law School. You might even look into Caltech, which is a STEM university. So those are kind of the different types of institutions that are out there that you can, maybe you've never thought of, maybe I want to attend a small specialized university as opposed to a UC or a CSU for grad school. So those are things that are worth considering as well. There's also no one-size-fits-all experience. For example, here at Cal State Fullerton, we have a 2-year social work program. We also have a 3-year program. There are benefits, there are pros and cons to doing each one over the other. One, for example, might be funding, but again, there is no one-size-fits-all experience. There are people who even go straight for PhDs right after their bachelor's program. And the reason is, for example, maybe you're looking into a PhD program at like USC or UCLA. Some programs might have the master's built into the PhD program where you get your master's along the way. And then you take your qualifying exams, and that's when you're granted your master's, depending on how the program is structured. Every program might be different. But then there are people who take the more traditional route where they go get a master's, maybe they're done after their master's, or they get a PhD after their master's. That's also an option for many people. Then there, of course, are the professional degrees like law school, med school, even MBA programs are considered professional programs. And what that means is basically you're focused more on the professional component, developing those skills. And yeah, that's kind of that route as well. Say, for example, you're thinking about a PhD. In my words, what's stopping you? Like, you don't let that hold you back. Just, I would say, if you know that you're qualified, I would say go for it. But just to kind of recap, the 4 types of universities, or the types of universities are the 4 years that are going to offer those, as well as the other private specialized institutions. But what should you really consider? So I have this chart here. And it's worth asking yourself, what are your academic goals? What are your professional goals? What are your personal needs? And what are your financial needs? So for example, with academic goals, will the graduate school you choose impact your academic success? Is the program a lot more rigorous? Maybe, for example, you're going to do a lot more research in one program over another. Another component is, what are your professional goals? How will you network? What type of internship opportunities might your program provide you? Do you have to put off employment in order to focus on your master's program? That one kind of ties into also financial needs and personal needs as well. Will, for example, the graduate school you choose have an impact on your personal life? For example, maybe you want to go to school, but it'll maybe force you to relocate if you choose that school. Or maybe, for example, you might have to spend less time with your family. Maybe you are a caregiver for someone, and that goes into financial needs. Maybe you're a primary caregiver for someone, or you have a full-time job. Will your graduate school you choose also have an impact on your finances? Do you have to take out student loans to go there? What kind of funding is available for you? Dwayne, I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I tell, so we go to these grad fairs, and I'm very upfront with students, and I try to tell them, like, again, grad school is hard, and so you really do need to find what school fits for you. And I try to tell them, it's kind of like the analogy of getting into a relationship. You really need to know, not only do you like the school, obviously the school is going to have to accept you, but you need to make that first determination whether or not all these stuff that you had mentioned, Christian, whether it's a private school or a research school or a Cal State school, whether or not it fits your needs and aligns with what it is that you want. Because I think it is important, because it is 2 years of a commitment, right? And there is a lot of money, right? Depending on which school you go to. And so you do need to take it all into consideration. And I tell students, when you're going to apply, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You apply to as many programs, and then you get the luxury of picking those schools, right? Versus being forced to buy that one school that you apply to. At the end of the day, you'll have more options, and you can kind of leverage that with talking to them about those financial needs. I know USC does a really good job of stringing people in and say, hey, look, you got accepted. We know the price tag's really high, but if you come into our program, we'll give you these stipends, we'll give you these scholarships to kind of offset some of the costs. And I know that holds true with us as well too. We have a lot of stipends and scholarships that are available for students. In fact, almost half of our students have one form of scholarship or stipend or another, which is really impressive, right? And so it's something to kind of really be mindful. So do your due diligence and research out whether or not the school is an accredited university or not, especially, if you're going to counseling or in social work. That's really important, because having that accreditation will allow you to get that license. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get licensed.
Yeah, and so I think that those are all really great points as well. And I think that kind of it's a good segue into this component. Like, what is the ideal timeline? A lot of people, I think, have this vision in their head of what the ideal timeline is. But I mean, this is an ideal one. It's not the perfect one. Of course, everyone has their own experiences to kind of prioritize as well. But say, for example, you're looking into grad school, and maybe, for example, as a first-year student, you're taking courses that are going to help you doing some career exploration. And say, for example, by your second year, you're looking to see if you're meeting those requirements, for example, GPA requirements, maybe any prerequisite courses. By your third year, you're already kind of determining these are the schools I want to apply to. I want to attend school maybe out of state or out of the country even. And by your fourth year, if you're on a 4-year track, by your fourth year, you're applying already. It seems like, in the blink of an eye, you're kind of already, again, moving on to the next step, even though it feels like you just started your bachelor's program, right? Your undergrad program. So again, this is an ideal timeline. It's not the perfect one, because, there are students who they graduate in 5 or 6 years, and they're taking things a little bit slower. So just to kind of rewind and recap on this section, you should be looking at, university websites. Maybe you're interested in a very specific program, or maybe you have faculty who you work with now and you're interested in what they're doing or what they're teaching. You want to know, how do I get into this? How do I pursue the same paths that they're pursuing? One of the things I love about our university website is if you click on a faculty member's name on their on the program department, it gives you a breakdown, like maybe where they went to school, what kind of research they've been doing. And if you're really interested in what they're doing as well, reaching out to them is something that I highly recommend. Also, reach out to them, write a short email, maybe they'll ask you, well, what are your experiences like? What does your resume look like? Or maybe you're reaching out to faculty at the institutions you're actually wanting to go to. And faculty really do enjoy that. I don't know, Dr. Lee, if your microphone's working, maybe you can chime in on this as well, on students reaching out to the department.
Yes, sorry, the Zoom is acting weird, so I'm having hard time to get into, to it. So as a graduate program advisor for the Department of Kinesiology, we are looking for those potential applicants who already contact each individual faculty. So without that initiation or the email, it is really hard for the potential applicants, to be reviewed, their application, even if they had a good GPA or the GRE score or whatever. But there is we need to get to know as a faculty who you are, and prior to the applications process, that we had a chance to talk to each of you.
Yeah, and so that kind of reaffirms, don't be afraid to reach out to faculty. And here's some quick links. Basically, I love the third one, or the fourth one rather, the Cal State one. If you're interested in staying at a CSU school, this link, if you go on calstate.edu/apply, you can actually go to the bottom and search for, maybe you're interested in a specific discipline. You can search for every single program in the Cal State system that offers your degree. That is one recommendation that I have for you. Or maybe you don't know where you want to go yet. Maybe you have a little bit more freedom to attend schools out of the area because maybe you're not committed to a specific region. Dr. Lee, and I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, this is the only way I can communicate. So I'd like to add it to that. I had a couple of the potential, the students that they wanted to reach out to the faculty, but they don't know how to navigate it. Then I think the best person so you should look into is as a graduate program advisor or the coordinator. So if you contact that person first, so that will help you to guide through who needs to contact, the VI, or they give you the specific information in terms of directions and so on.
And so ultimately, there's also those students who maybe have that inner fear of like, well, if I pursue academia, then that means that I have to be a professor. Maybe, for example, you do really want to get a PhD, right? You don't necessarily have to go back into academia in order to pursue that degree. There are people, for example, who get PhDs and they go into research and development for large corporations. Maybe, for example, you're looking into getting a PhD in kinesiology, and maybe you go and do research and development for Nike or Adidas, right? That's actually something that that you can actually do. There are people who, for example, get PhDs in psychology, and they have the option to work for Google in people operations. That's kind of their terminology for HR, and that's something you can also do. Maybe that's your area of interest, right? But there is no limitations to what you can or cannot do with a PhD or a master's. It depends more so on what kind of opportunities, again, does your university provide you access to. Maybe you're looking into like an R1 school, which is heavy on research. Cal State Fullerton is an R2 school, and there might be differences, subtle differences even, in how the university approaches research. So that's something that maybe you want to look into. If you don't go to grad school, there's nothing wrong with that. It ultimately, again, depends on what kind of experiences do you have as an undergrad. What does your program provide you access to? Maybe there are partnerships that the university has. I know, for example, in social work, there are partnerships with community organizations or government organizations for students to do their field work at, and that might ultimately be a major determiner of how far a student gets in their career. Duan, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so as Cristian said, part of the social work program requires a 2-year internship. And so our field faculty director does a great job in really making sure that your interest aligns with where you guys are ultimately getting placed. And also, as I mentioned, based on if you came in with scholarships or stipends, some of those stipends have expectations as to where you're going to be placed as well too. And so, but it is a really great way to kind of network and also to kind of understand and get an idea of what to expect as a social worker, and to gain these initial experiences in doing therapy and all this stuff. And so for me, that is probably the biggest pedagogy of social work, is the field experiences. And what I mean by that is it's a huge piece to our program. And um, in all full disclosure, if you asked me if I was going to teach at an academic institution 15 years ago, I didn't even think I would qualify, because I thought everyone who at the university level had a PhD. But like Christian said, at the college level, you could with a master's level, but I just never thought. And then I realized, 60% of our faculty don't have PhDs, and that's totally okay, and that's really cool, and that really does make the makeup of our program. But it does allow you guys to have some insights and this gained experience in a way where you're supported, but you're not, an employee, but you're an intern. So you can have these risks of making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so ultimately, when you graduate, you're going to be that much more fine-tuned as a professional.
And then Dr. Lee, I don't know if you have any input as well on research and opportunities students might have.
Yeah, so I think I missed a big chunk of the beginning, so I don't really know what you guys discussed. However, but one thing I always give my undergraduate students, okay, if you're thinking about your career, whether you pursue the master program or not, I would strongly encourage them to have the field experience, like Dr. Dan was mentioning, because that way you can shadow what is the master student's life looks like, and you can also feel if the research is the direction you want it to go, or is there anything else beside the research portion of it, is there what's going on in the field. It is because by taking the courses, those lecture-based courses doesn't give you the clear idea what is the job markets out there, and the best way you get the information, talk to the faculty, and then talk to those other folks that they're already in the field, and they give you the, insight of how to pursue and what are the, mistake they made and what things you should, go into it. So, earlier is better. I like the timeline you share is, but even if you decided not to pursue at the end for going to the master program, but it helps you to narrowing down your path.
And so I want to talk now about what it looks like applying to grad school at Cal State Fullerton. We do have dozens of programs throughout all 8 colleges. I'll share what that looks like in a second. But again, as far as applying goes, we do have a 2-step admissions process, as I like to call it. You must meet the CSU admissions threshold, as well as any other admission requirements that the programs or departments do set in place. So I know that sounds kind of confusing, because I know for some programs there's only one application. Some programs have a supplemental application through a separate system, for example, social work. But you do have to be what's called CSU eligible. And I like to think about it kind of like the minimum wage versus the state minimum wage here in California. The CSU standard, I want to say, is like the federal minimum wage, where it's like the bare minimum. This is kind of, the 2.5 GPA, bachelor's degree in hand. For those who completed bachelor's degrees overseas, they do require language scores and be in good academic standing at the last institution you attended. However, programs are then allowed to set a higher bar for their students for admission. That might be, for example, a higher GPA standard. They might ask for specific prerequisite courses, or for you to have completed a specific major. If you haven't, then they might have a different set of requirements there. They might require test scores like the GRE or the GMAT, depending on the program, the school, and other requirements. Some programs encourage internships or work experience in order to supplement their application. Dr. Lee, I know, for example, that the kinesiology program traditionally requires a GRE. I don't know if you want to talk just briefly about that.
Yeah, so we used to require GRE, but we've been waiving the GRE since pandemic happened. So and they will continue to waiving until the fall 2023. And I like to add on to the additional condition that we have a specific criteria, for the applicant who, eligible to apply our program. However, if you talk to the advisor, the graduate program advisor in advance, is particularly you are not coming from the same, the department or the same field, there's ways that we can guide you to how, what courses you need to take, or we can, accept you as a conditionally, and then you can continuously taking those prerequisite courses while you are in the master program.
And then I know that the social work program is a little bit different as well, wherein you do have a completely separate system and application on top of the Cal State Apply website. So there are two specific applications you must submit in order to be considered for admission. One of the mistakes that I've seen personally is students will only complete Cal State Apply, and then they won't complete, for example, the department application, which is on a separate portal. And so students, it's like if they never even applied. I don't know if, Duan, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as once you do the Cal State Apply, when you choose the social work department, it brings you to another link to another portal, and it's another set of applications. Some of them it is a little bit redundant, but asking some of the similar questions, but it is important because that's where we draw our applications from versus the Cal State Apply, right? Because Cal State Apply is the generic kind of gatekeeper. And then once you get in, depending on the specific program, like for instance, social work, you have to go to our program and apply through our program through that link.
So that kind of segues into this. How do you apply to the university? The first step would be to initiate the Cal State Apply application. Some programs will have additional steps. Maybe you need to submit documentations to the departments directly, or sometimes you can upload everything on Cal State Apply. The social work program is one of those programs where you do have that separate portal, and that's again kind of addressing how do you apply to the program itself. How do you know you're meeting those requirements? For example, even the counseling program has a very similar application process to social work, and they will ask you, for example, they have 4 areas of courses that you must complete in order to be eligible for that program. And so on the program website, it'll ask you, well, which course did you take that qualifies under this requirement, and did you get a B or better, and what grade did you get? And so those are kind of how you would qualify for admissions for that program. Again, every program might have a different step, even different deadlines. So the applications, for example, for the master's programs across all the CSUs opened up on October 1st. However, many programs maybe even have rolling deadlines where it's first come, first served. Some programs you won't receive a notice until every single application, every single student is sifted through. And in some cases, maybe you might, for example, have to submit letters of recommendation, unofficial transcripts in your application, a personal statement or a statement of purpose, or both sometimes. Sometimes even an interview. I know the social work program does, in fact, interview its candidates for admission. And I've seen other social work programs across the CSU do the same. Some programs, they don't require interviews, but that's mostly the commonality I've seen across social work specifically. Duan, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so, obviously we need everything. We need transcripts, we need letters of recommendation, we need a personal statement. Because, specifically coming into this field, we want to really get a good idea of what's your why, like why are you coming into this program? And I think that kind of holds true with all graduate programs, as Cristian mentioned initially. So definitely think about why is it and how that resonates with you, because it is important. Because like I said, in our program, we do require a personal statement. And so it does allow us a little insight to what it is that you're interested about in our program and how we could be a good fit for you as well as for you, our program. So something to kind of really think about in that sense.
And then Dr. Lee, I don't know if you want to talk about for example, how kinesiology is a little bit different in the admissions process than maybe social work or any of the other programs.
Yeah, so we are a little bit different than, with the social work. So we do not, it's not rolling basis. So we will wait until the application cycle close, then we'll review, and within the months, normally we'll send out the decisions about, our program. And there is if we during the reviewing process, so if we miss something, then we individually send email to the particular participant the applicants, and they receive the much further clarifications. But our program we do not require to have an interview in the part of the application process, but would be ideal to reach out to them ahead of time.
Yeah. And so here's just a breakdown. This is all of the 8 colleges we have across our campus, all which have master's degrees housed within those colleges. So you are currently in the College of HHD. And so if you look at this list, this is every single master's program that's offered. So I know here I have Duan, and I also have Dr. Lee from just 2 of the programs that are in health and human development. We also have programs across other disciplines. There are some instances where students even switch disciplines. Maybe, for example, they started off pursuing a degree in, for example, psychology, and they decide, for example, that they want to get a master's in kinesiology, which is actually possible. As Dr. Lee was explaining, maybe you don't have the background for the discipline, but you can most certainly find ways around that to pursue your master's in that specific area. And they have their set of requirements for how to do that as well. For social work, there isn't a major requirement. You don't have to major, for example, in human services, as many people do. You can major in sociology, psychology, as long as you have a background in liberal arts, is what the application states, which most students who graduate from a CSU will have.
Yeah, our threshold is pretty low. And we do it because I think it's also the intent that we want a diverse population. We want a diverse cohort, and it does and we understand that it takes all walks of life to come into this field. And some of our folks who come in, that they're using us as a stepping stone to get to medical school or to get their PhD. So we understand that, but we don't discriminate when it comes to undergrad degrees.
So I want to talk now about funding. Funding, I know, is a major component to, will I even go to grad school, right? There are various different ways to pay for grad school. I know, for example, Duan was talking about stipends that the social work program offers. Some students, for example, who I know are in the part-time social work program also get reimbursed by their jobs, and that's how they pay for grad school. I always say student loans should always be more of a last resort, because there is significant opportunities for funding that are not loans at the CSU level. And that's why, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is that the CSU is one of the best higher education systems in the country, because it still does provide funding opportunities for its graduate students. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I have a whole entire workshop dedicated to filing financial aid that I recommend you all look into as well if you're in the process of applying. It's a very quick process, to be honest, the actual filing for financial aid process, and it does open up doors for other types of funding. So you can be eligible for grants like the state university grant, which many students who maybe are from low-income households, they qualify for. You can also apply for scholarships and fellowships like the Palante Fellowship Program, which I actually oversee. There are also, as I said, loans, whether it be the federal direct unsubsidized loan, which is the traditional loan for grad students, as well as the direct plus loan. Maybe you select a more expensive institution and you need to take out additional funding, right? There's also fellowships, associateships, and assistantships that are basically jobs on campus that will provide you a paycheck. I know, for example, within the kinesiology department, there are sometimes opportunities to do that depending on which faculty you're working with. Maybe you're doing research with a faculty member and you're provided money in return, so you're actually having a job. Dr. Lee, I don't know if you want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so if you are working under a faculty in the supervisions, and then they need the GA, graduate assistant, so particularly it's designated for the research portion of it. So if you are, even though you're not teaching, and not the TA position, but you can hire as a graduate assistants in working, for the project you may be is working on for your master's program. So it is a spot is limited, but if you guys share the interest ahead of time, and we can schedule it and have you work like a minimum of the 4 hours, designated for the research portion of it.
Cool. And then for the social work program, Duan, I don't know if there's any types of opportunities for associateships and assistantships like that, the way that they are for kinesiology. And if there's not, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about like the stipends and how those work.
Absolutely. It very rare. I just know based on just talking to other faculty, we don't have a lot of assistantships or fellowships, but we do have, like I said before, a lot of stipends and scholarship, as you mentioned, the Palante Fellowship Program. We do have that. Some of our students are in that. I oversee a federal grant for public child welfare. So if anyone who's interested in working in the county in public child welfare, that particular stipend is a $37,000 stipend. So that's a lot of money, right? Especially when you're at a Cal State school, because as I mentioned, that pretty much pays for your whole program and then some. And so definitely there are tons of scholarships available. It's just really about reaching out and asking, and then we can kind of share with you and try to base the scholarships based on your areas of interest, because we do have other stipends and scholarships available based on the needs of the students as well as their areas of interest.
Yeah, and then I want to talk about, for those of you who are maybe saying, well, which application is right for me, just to give you a quick breakdown. If you are a US citizen or other eligible non-citizen, like a permanent resident, you would file the traditional FAFSA form. If you are a non-citizen who is AB 540 eligible, you would file the California DREAM Act. So both of those will provide you access to the state university grant should you be eligible for it. And I'll talk about the state university grant in a second. But I want to talk first about the federal loan rates. So currently the federal loans are at the highest rate that they've been in the last 10 years or so. So currently the federal direct unsubsidized loan is at 6.54% APR, and the federal direct plus loan for grad students is at 7.54. One of the important things to note is that the second that those loans get dispersed into your account, you start accumulating interest. That is something that's really important to know, and that's why I always discourage students from taking out more in loans than they actually need. On average, to complete a master's degree at a CSU, it costs about $16,000, give or take. That's about the amount of money. So per semester, depending on if you're enrolled full-time, part-time. For part-time students, you're looking at about maybe $2,000, give or take, dollars. If you're enrolled full-time, it's about $4,000. That's 4,200, give or take. And I'll talk about what the state university grant covers, what it will not cover, and how you qualify for that as well. But before, I want to talk also about, for those of you who maybe are applying for the California DREAM Act, you do qualify for state loans. So you won't be eligible for federal loans, but you will qualify for state loans through the California DREAM loan. For those students, you have to have completed your California DREAM Act by March 2nd, have an AB 540 affidavit on file with the institution you attend. So if maybe you're not attending Cal State Fullerton for grad school, but you're attending another institution, make sure they have your AB 540 on file. You must be also enrolled at least half-time. So how enrollment works for grad students is 6 to 8 units is part-time. Anything below 6 is half-time. And then 8 and above is full-time. That's kind of how the enrollment works for grad students. It's also need-based, so you must demonstrate financial need. You must be meeting satisfactory academic progress. You must have never defaulted on a student loan, and you must complete master promissory note, loan entrance counseling, and loan exit counseling with your institution. Another thing to take note is that the APR for the DREAM loan is at 4.99%. You can get it if you attend a CSU or a UC, and you can only receive $20,000 per the lifetime of the loan. So both as a graduate and an undergraduate student, with only being able to take out $4,000 annually. This is a subsidized loan, which means you will not accrue interest while you are enrolled at least half-time. And there is a 6-month grace period from the time you stop full-time enrollment, or half-time enrollment rather, before it starts accumulating interest and before you have to pay back the loan. So again, it is a subsidized loan for those of you who are eligible for the DREAM loan, okay? As far as the state university grant, this is a little bit more the one that kind of excites students because they didn't know maybe that funding was available. For this one, you must apply for FAFSA before the March 2nd deadline. You must have an EFC or estimated family contribution of $4,000 or less. So when you file your FAFSA, it'll give you your EFC is, and usually it's about 5 digits. I always say the closer you are to 0, the better, because we are a large campus. They generally prioritize students whose EFC is 0. You must be a California resident or AB 540 eligible. So those students who file for the California DREAM Act will also be eligible for state university grant. And just like the state or the DREAM loan, you must be enrolled at least half-time, which that means 6 or more graduate units. As a graduate student, you will also now be considered as independent. Many students have that misconception of my parents make too much money, and that will no longer be a factor in the decisions based, of will I be qualifying for this. So that's something to look forward to for those of you who've had that issue in the past. There's also Palante Fellowship Program, which it is for students in the colleges of HHD, HSS, ECS, and NSM. We award it to 48 students. You get $500 in the fall, $500 in the spring. So I kind of want to put it to you this way. If you are filing for this fellowship, right, and you are getting the state university grant out of pocket, because the state university grant does not cover fees, this can help cover your fees. So I have students who they're enrolled in Palante this year, and they have a balance of $500, which we cover, and out of pocket, they only pay about $140, including the state, everything that the state university grant covers. The state university grant does not cover, for example, a student union fee, student health center fee, all those other fees that are tacked onto school. However, you can cover those through other ways, right? The deadline for this application is March 2nd, and we generally email students who are eligible, or sometimes faculty in the programs will encourage students to apply if they know that they're eligible as well. There's also the GRAD Equity Fellowship, which is very similar to Palante, but this one you can receive anywhere from $500 to $2,000. You need to submit an application form, a statement of purpose, a confidential letter of recommendation from a faculty member, and the deadline usually happens sometime around May. So in the late spring of the spring semester. We also have scholarship opportunities that you can actually access through your Titan portal. So our campus has a general scholarship application. If you search up scholarship on the left-hand side of your Titan portal, it'll take you to the website where you can actually apply. You only fill out one application, and your information gets sent out to dozens of application or scholarships around campus that you might be eligible for. So that's one way to also provide funding for grad school. Some of the colleges might have other scholarships that you can apply through other means. Maybe they have a direct link, or rather even a form or a way for you to access the scholarship specifically to a program or department or college. As far as associateships and assistantships and other student employment, you can actually find out about those maybe through the individual departments. As Dr. Lee was saying, if the earlier you reach out to a faculty member, if you're interested in research or anything like that, the better. There's also the Career Center, which actually posts some of these on their website. But again, I know many of you all are already familiar with these resources, but we do have tons of resources on campus, like the Polak Library. If you're not familiar, each college and major has actually a designated librarian if you're doing research that they can assist you in finding resources. We also have the Grad Study Center here where I'm at, where we also house writing consultants who actually help with assisting in writing papers and proofreading. So if you ever get stuck on a paper and maybe you need to ask questions, they're also available to help. If you're ever on campus and you maybe want to take a look at where the Grad Study Center is, we are located inside Langsdorff Hall. We even have summer hours for students maybe who are enrolled in the summer, Monday through Thursday from 10 to 7. During the fall and the spring, we're open the same times, plus Fridays from 10 to 5. If you're not sure which building we're in, I know with the pandemic, a lot of students kind of get lost around campus still. We are the building that looks like Duloc from Shrek. So that's the way that I kind of tell students, make sure you look for the building that looks like Duloc. And that generally helps people find us. We're on the second floor around the corner from the Career Center. So these are some of the services. We have our private study room. We host workshops. You can even store your food here and come and pick it up in the middle of the day if you maybe are on campus. I know that Duan was talking about students being in class from 10 to 6, right? So if you ever want to come here and maybe take breaks or study after class, this is also an additional place you can do that.